the station buffet. Trains came and went. They were shunted, coupled and uncoupled to the waving of furled and unfurled signal flags. Locomotives hooted, guards tooted their horns, and shunters blew their whistles. Smoke rose in endless ladders to the sky. Hissing engines scalded the cold winter clouds with clouds of boiling steam. Fuflygin, the divisional manager, and Pavel Ferapontovich Antipov, the track overseer of the station area, walked up and down along the edge of the tracks. Antipov had been pestering the repair shops about the quality of the spare parts for mending the tracks. The steel was not sufficiently tensile, the rails failed the test for strains, and Antipov thought that they would crack in the frosty weather. The management merely shelved his complaints. Someone was making money on the contracts. Fuflygin wore an expensive fur coat on which the piping of the railway uniform had been sewn. It was unbuttoned, showing his new civilian serge suit. He stepped cautiously on the embankment, glancing down with pleasure at the line of his lapels, the straight creases on his trousers, and his elegant shoes. What Antipov was saying came in one ear and went out the other. Fuflygin had his own thoughts. He kept taking out his watch and looking at it. He was in a hurry to be off. Quite right, my dear fellow, he broke in impatiently, but that's only dangerous on the main lines with a lot of traffic. But just look at what you've got. Sidings and dead ends, nettles and dandelions. And the traffic at most an old shunting engine for sorting the empties. What more do you want? You must be out of your mind. Talk about steel wooden rails would do here. Fuflygin looked at his watch, snapped the lid, and gazed into the distance where a road ran toward the railway. A carriage came into sight at a bend of the road. This was Fuflygin's own turnout. His wife had come for him. The coachman drew in the horses almost at the edge of the tracks, talking to them in a high-pitched womanish voice, like a nursemaid scolding fretful children. They were frightened of trains. In a corner of the carriage sat a pretty woman negligently leaning against the cushions. "Well, my good fellow, some other time," said the divisional manager with a wave of the hand, as much as to say, "I've got more important things than rails to think about." The couple drove off. 6. 3 or 4 hours later, almost at dusk, in a field some distance from the track, where no one had been visible until then, 2 figures rose out of the ground and, looking back over their shoulders, quickly walked away. "Let's walk faster," said Tverdin. "I'm not worried about spies following us, but the moment those slowpokes in their hole in the ground have finished they'll come out and catch up with us. I can't bear the sight of them. What's the point of having a committee if you drag things out like that? You play with fire and then you duck for shelter. You're a fine one yourself siding with that lot. My Daria's got typhus. I ought to be taking her to the hospital. Until I've done that I can't think about anything else. They say the wages are being paid today. I'll go around to the office. If it wasn't payday I'd chuck the lot of you, honest to God I would. I'd stop all this myself, I wouldn't wait a minute. And how would you do that, if I may ask? Nothing to it. I'd go down to the boiler room and blow the whistle. That's all." They said goodbye and went off in different directions. Tverdin walked across the tracks toward the town. He ran into people coming from the office with their pay. There were a great many of them. By the look of it he reckoned that nearly all the station workers had been paid. It was getting dark, the lights were on in the office. Idle workers crowded in the square outside it. In the driveway stood Fuflygin's carriage and in it sat Fuflygin's wife, still in the same pose as though she had not moved since morning. She was waiting for her husband, who was getting his money. Suddenly sleet began to fall. The coachman climbed down from his box to put up the leather hood. While he tugged at the stiff struts, one leg braced against the back of the carriage, Fuflygin sat admiring the silver beads of sleet glittering in the light of the office lamps. Her unblinking dreamy eyes were fixed on a point above the heads of the workers in a manner suggesting that her glance could, in case of need, go through them as through sleet or mist. Tverdin caught sight of her expression. It gave him a turn. He walked past without greeting her and decided to call for his wages later, so as not to run into her husband at the office. He crossed over to the darker side of the square, toward the workshops and the black shape of the turntable with tracks fanning out from it toward the depot. Tverdin. Kuprik. Several voices called out of the darkness. There was a little crowd outside the workshops. Inside, someone was yelling and a boy was crying. "Do go in and help that boy, Kuprian Sablievik," said a woman in the crowd. As usual, the old foreman, Pyotr Kudalyaev, was walloping his young apprentice Yuzupka. Kudalyaev had not always been a tormentor of apprentices and a brawling drunkard. There had been a time when, as a dashing young workman, he had attracted the admiring glances of merchants and priests' daughters in Moscow's industrial suburbs. But the girl he courted, Marfa, who had graduated that year from the diocesan convent school, had turned him down and had married his comrade, the mechanic Savlii Nikitish, Tverdin's father. 5 years after Savlii's horrible end, he was burned to death in the sensational railway crash of 1888. Kudalyaev renewed his suit, but again Marfa Gavrilovna rejected him. So Kudalyaev took to drink and rowdiness, trying to get even with the world which was to blame, so he believed, for all his misfortunes. Yuzupka was the son of Gimazitin, the janitor at the block of tenements where Tverdin lived. Tverdin had taken the boy under his wing, and this added fuel to Kudalyaev's hostility. "Is that the way to hold a file, you Asiatic?" bellowed Kudalyaev, dragging Yuzupka by the hair and pummeling the back of his neck. "Is that the way to strip down a casting, you slit-eyed Tartar? Ouch, I won't do it any more, mister, ow, I won't do it any more, ouch, it hurts." He's been told 1,000 times. First adjust the mandrel and then screw up the chuck, but no, he must do it his own way. Nearly broke the spindle, the bastard. "I didn't touch the spindle, honest I didn't." "Why do you tyrannize the boy?" asked Tverdin, elbowing his way through the crowd. "It's none of your business," Kudalyaev snapped. "I'm asking you why you tyrannize the boy. And I'm telling you to move off before there's trouble, you socialist meddler. Killing's too good for him, such scum, he nearly broke my spindle. He should thank his lucky stars he's still alive, the slit-eyed devil. All I did was tweak his ears and pull his hair a bit. So you think he should be beheaded for this? You ought to be ashamed of yourself, really, an old foreman like you. You've got gray hair but you still haven't learned sense. Move on, I tell you, while you're still in one piece. I'll knock the stuffing out of you, preaching at me, you dog's arse. You were made on the tracks, you jellyfish, under your father's very nose. I know your mother, the slut, the mangy cat, the crumpled skirt. What happened next was over in a minute. Both men seized the first thing that came to hand on the lathe benches where heavy tools and pieces of iron were lying about, and would have killed each other if the crowd had not rushed in to separate them. Kudalyaev and Tverdin stood with their heads bent down, their foreheads almost touching, pale, with bloodshot eyes. They were so angry that they could not utter a word. They were held firmly, their arms gripped from behind. Once or twice they tried to break free, twisting their bodies and dragging their comrades who were hanging onto them. Hooks and buttons went flying, their jackets and shirts slipped off, baring their shoulders. Around them was a ceaseless uproar. The chisel. Take the chisel away from him, he'll smash his head in. Easy now, Pyotr old man, or we'll break your arm. What are we playing around with them for? Drag them apart and put them under lock and key and there's an end to it. With a superhuman effort Tverdin suddenly shook off the men who clung to him and, breaking loose, dashed to the door. They started after him but, seeing that he had changed his mind, left him alone. He went out, slamming the door, and marched off without turning around. The damp autumn night closed in on him. You try to help them and they come at you with a knife, he muttered, striding on unconscious of his direction. This world of ignominy and fraud, in which an overfed lady had the impertinence to stare right through a crowd of working men, and where a drink-sodden victim of such an order found pleasure in torturing his comrades, this world was now more hateful to him than ever before. He hurried on as though his pace might hasten the time when everything on earth would be as rational and harmonious as it was now inside his feverish head. He knew that all their struggles in the last few days, the troubles on the line, the speeches at meetings, the decision to strike not carried out yet but at least not cancelled, were separate stages on the great road lying ahead of them. But at the moment he was so worked up that he wanted to run all the way without stopping to draw breath. He did not realize where he was going with his long strides, but his feet knew very well where they were taking him. It was not until much later that Tverdin learned of the decision, taken by the strike committee after he had left the underground shelter with Antipov, to begin the strike that very night. They decided then and there which of them was to go where and which men would be called out. At the moment when the whistle of the engine repair shop blew, as though coming from the very depths of Tverdin's soul, hoarsely at first and then gradually clearing, a crowd was already moving from the depot and the freight yard. Soon it was joined by the men from the boiler room, who had down tools at Tverdin's signal. For many years Tverdin thought that it was he alone who had stopped work and traffic on the line that night. Only much later, at the trial, when he was charged with complicity in the strike but not with inciting it, did he learn the truth. People ran out asking, "Where is everybody going? What's the signal for?" "You're not deaf," came from the darkness. "It's a fire. They're sounding the alarm. They want us to put it out." "Where's the fire?" "There must be a fire or they wouldn't be sounding the alarm." Doors banged, more people came out. Other voices were heard. "Fire! Listen to the ignorant lout. It's a strike, that's what it is, see. Let them get some other fools to do their dirty work. Let's go, boys." More and more people joined the crowd. The railway workers were on strike. 7. Tverdin went home 2 days later, unshaven, drawn with lack of sleep, and chilled to the bone. Frost, unusual at this time of year, had set in the night before, and Tverdin was not dressed for winter. The janitor, Gimazietin, met him at the gate. "Thank you, Mr. Tverdin," he babbled in broken Russian. "You didn't let Yuzupka come to harm. I will always pray for you." "You're crazy, Gimazietin, who are you calling mister? Cut it out and say what you have to say quickly, you see how cold it is." "Why should you be cold? You will soon be warm, Kuprian Savlich. Me and your mother Marfa Gavrilovna brought a whole shedful of wood from the freight station yesterday, all birch good, dry wood." "Thanks, Gimazietin. If there's something else you want to tell me, let's have it quickly. I'm frozen. I wanted to tell you not to spend the night at home, Savlich. You must hide. The police have been here asking who comes to the house." "Nobody comes," I said. "My relief comes," I said. "The people from the railway, but no strangers come," I said. "Not on your life." Tverdin was unmarried and lived with his mother and his younger married brother. The tenements belonged to the neighboring Church of the Holy Trinity. Among the lodgers were some of the clergy and 2 artels, or associations, of street hawkers, one of butchers, the other of greengrocers, but most of them were workers on the Moscow-Brest railway. It was a stone house. All around the dirty and unpaved courtyard ran a wooden passageway. Out of it rose a number of dirty, slippery outside staircases, reeking of cats and cabbage. On the landings were privies and padlocked storerooms. Tverdin's brother had fought as a conscript in the war and had been wounded at Wafankow. Now he was convalescing at the military hospital in Krasnoyarsk, and his wife and 2 daughters had gone there to see him and to bring him home. The Tverzins, hereditary railway workers, traveled all over Russia on official passes. The